Welcome to the Help Group's Mental Health Matters Spotlight Series. I'm Lisa Rosati, Director of Special Projects. In honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, the Help Group is proud to produce a special collection of expert-led talks premiering throughout the month of May. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Dorit Saberi. Dr. Saberi is a supervising psychologist and the co-founder and clinical director of the Safe Harbor Trauma Recovery Center at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. She also serves as a health sciences professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine and is an investigator at the Lundquist Institute at Harbor UCLA. In addition to conducting research, Dr. Saberi provides direct clinical services, supervision, teaching, and consultation in evidence-based best practices tailored for diverse populations. She is the author of best practice guidelines related to trauma-informed and trauma-specific care. Dr. Saberi also serves as vice chair on the board of directors for Fostering Unity, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving family connections and preventing the trauma of repeated displacement. She is widely recognized as a sought-after trainer and consultant on the very topic she is talking about today. We are so grateful she joins us to share her expertise with the presentation on provider wellness, addressing burnout, compassion fatigue, and building resilience and post-traumatic growth. Dr. Saberi?
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you to the Help Group for putting this together. This is one of my favorite subjects to talk on, specifically because we, as providers, we have to take care of ourselves, right? Physician, heal thyself applies here very poignantly. So I have a little bit on my background. I have worked in mental health for the last 25 years in various capacities. I noticed that my specialty centers around trauma began with some working with rape, being a rape advocate, and working with post-traumatic responses to rape experiences and domestic violence. And then I worked at Twin Towers Correctional Facility in a grant program that focused on dually diagnosed mothers with young children. And the goal was to reduce recidivism. So a lot of the traumas I saw in correctional settings followed me in a way that motivated me to create more grants. And that's how the Trauma Recovery Center at Harbor UCLA was created in 2019 through a grant through the California Victim Compensation Board. And we're very fortunate to get funding again for the next cycle. And our goal is to work with all levels of trauma, all kinds of trauma resulting from interpersonal violence, starting a very young age. Our youngest clients are 3 and all the way through the lifespan into the 90s. So my experience really centers around trauma. And I think that my way of dealing with post-traumatic growth as a provider and the secondary stress response that we all feel is to really pay attention to how I balance my life and how my value-aligned work is showing up in the personal realm as well. And so one area that, Lisa, you spoke about is I serve as for a nonprofit, Fostering Unity, and that organization, the goal is to create safety and placement stability for foster children within resource family. As a resource parent myself and an adoptive mother of a now 9-year-old, I noticed how important it is to foster this post-traumatic growth from an early age. And this is where the personal and the professional aligns for me as well. And so I'll talk a little bit about the balance and value-aligned work as a way to combat post-traumatic growth. And I'll start with just the symbol for the Trauma Recovery Center and say very little about our multidisciplinary team approach that's really steeped in a social justice framework. And our various team members are trained to do not just case management and psychotherapy, but really balance wearing multiple hats and being advocates, looking at macro level changes for individuals, populations that have suffered both within family systems that are abusive, but maybe even more globally as immigrant and asylum seeker traumas, people associated with gangs and doing some gang diversion that way, and also thinking about human trafficking, which is another area that we focus on. I wanted to start with an inspiring story. I mentioned that I worked at the jail, Twin Towers Correctional Facility. And when I was preparing this talk, I have my usual stories that come to mind, but this one kind of snuck in there at the last minute. And I thought about it because sometimes the jail is thought of as a dark place. And my students, when I taught them forensic psychology, would call my stories from the jail, the tales from the jail side, like from the dark side. And this one stands out as an inspiring one. It's a story of a young woman in her early 20s that was in Twin Towers for a drug-related crime. And I remember that she was working on some trauma aspects of her life and wanting to come out and reunify with her child. And she wanted to get a job and have a responsible adult profession at that point. And what she did before, unfortunately, because of circumstance and lack of other avenues, is she was stripping for a living. And I remember going to her Social Security hearing in order to establish benefits first upon release. And I remember sitting with her and the judge. And at that moment, before we came there, I asked her to speak from her heart. That's the main thing I said. Just tell the truth and speak from your heart. And the judge turned to her and said, well, you have a profession. You were a stripper. Why wouldn't you continue to do that? And she stood up, and so much power in her voice. She said, this was not a profession. This was humiliation, a daily humiliation in my life that I did not want to tolerate anymore. I was forced into this lifestyle when I was younger, by family when I was 16, and this is no longer the legacy I want to live. And that moment of resilience really showed me that those small interventions, even in a jail setting, can create such a difference in people's lives. And that really stayed with me and came up recently as I was thinking about the concept of resiliency. So we'll talk a lot today about resiliency and resiliency building, and I'll try to embed stories as we go. Our goal is to cover some of the early stress models and really shift into newer ones that really look at not just the primitive brain and not a lot of prefrontal involvement in how we address stress and how we grow from it, to more novel, I guess, or newer theories that address more than just our hormones and our limbic system. Talk from there about compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma, versus the opposite of that is compassion satisfaction. That's a new term that's introduced. And then really hone the concept of resilience and think of models for building resilience, mostly from positive psychology, like rewiring for happiness through neuroplasticity, the PERMA model by Seligman. Look at gratitude and how a gratitude practice enhances the concept of resiliency, and how to create post-traumatic growth intentionally, not to just wait for it to happen almost spontaneously, but really understand it and create it, both for yourself and in your client's life. And then from community resiliency model, there is a concept of building resilient stories. And I will teach you how to create those in the end. I'd like to start with a quote. When pain knocks on the door, wise ones breathe deeply and say, "Come in, sit down with me, and don't leave until you've taught me what I need to know." And there is wisdom in allowing pain to enter and stay with it for a while. I think that's the way we breed self compassion. And we don't have to run to resilience. We have to first acknowledge that pain is there in our home. So, a little bit on stress theories. We all know them well, from Cannon Burr to Selye's old theory related to fight, flight, freeze. There's more fawn, for a fornicate, feed. There's 6 Fs now that have accumulated. Those were the older theories that really focused on our body's physiological reaction and hormonal reaction, activating the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and really sending adrenaline to our body and the sympathetic nervous system kicking in to respond to stress. Very little of the prefrontal cortex is involved in the more primitive reactions to stress. And when we look at the newer models, one particularly by Shelley Taylor out of UCLA and her colleagues, is the concept of tend and befriend. And tend and befriend is actually a stress response, but it's a coping response rather than a reactionary response. And tend is tending to the young in all species, and especially in humans. And it's attributed mostly to women, but we know both genders respond to the need for tending, the need to protect the young. And it doesn't always have to be the young. It could be tending to a friend, tending to someone less fortunate, tending to parts of you that need healing. So tend can be internal. And befriending is connecting to a social group in order to create safety. And tend and befriend, I often teach it to my clients as a way to participate in the social environment that also is a way to fortify yourself. And it could be very simple practices like smiling to a stranger, saying thank you more intentionally, opening doors, paying a compliment. Any of those are small ways to tend and befriend. And opposite to stress responses that activate cortisol and activate adrenaline, tend and befriend actually releases oxytocin. So the hormonal reactions from the brain to the body are things that please us and appease us and make us feel peaceful and coming back to homeostasis. So this is a resilient pause for all of you. Feel free, by the way, when you see this resiliency pause, to pause your video and think in this exercise, how can you cultivate, tend, and befriend on a daily basis in your life now? How can you invite that into your life to allow more thriving at this time? So we'll continue with stress-related concepts that are very much about the healing profession, as well as the medical profession. Burnout began mostly looking at nurses in hospitals and how they respond to work overload and role overload, and balancing priorities. Also look at secondary trauma and second victim issues, vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. And we'll define each of them and see how they add up to the more cumulative effect of compassion fatigue. One reminder is it's impossible not to feel some compassion fatigue, and it starts with the burn that we feel when we are encountering a traumatic experience of another human. It's not wise to compartmentalize, and we run out of compartments. So when you hear that story, when I hear traumatic stories, I let them in. I actually reflect on them and think about what it must have been like to be in that position. I let my mirror neurons fire at will. And I think about unmirroring only later. I think about how do I get some distance from that, and where am I too confluent, and how would I step back and let myself release some of the pressure of that story. And again, I don't forget about the story. I present a bit of an antidote to the traumatic narrative by accumulating the opposite of a traumatic narrative, which is a pleasant and joyous narrative. And where do I find those? Everywhere. After a hard day at Harbor and doing trauma work, I go to a playground. Like a child, I go to a playground and I purposely and intentionally listen to laughter. I have a 9-year-old, so it's nice that we both get to enjoy it. But I pay attention to parents who are giving and kind, and hug and console their children when they fall. And this is the antithesis of a story of an abusive household where children are harmed. That's how I accumulate the positive and what keeps me feeling fortified. It's not by forgetting the terrible story, it's by focusing on the positive one. It's an important component to remind us how to not allow the cumulative effects of post traumatic growth sit with us and rule our lives. But how do we know that there is a cumulative effect? And how do we notice the signs? And so there are a number of signs that have been addressed in the literature. And I won't say all of them, but you can read them and maybe slowly think about what applies to you. What are some signs that are present for you even now? And how do those add up to your compassion fatigue, the burden of knowledge about the underbelly of life? And let's look at each concept separately. So, burnout results from expectations of others that exceed your own ability to perform. So, not being able to answer the demands from your environment, or trying to answer that demand and a few others at the same time, like being a mother, and also being a professional, and also volunteering and also teaching. There is a role conflict, and you have to learn how to create that balance, or burnout can set in. And one interesting statistic from hospitals in which burnout was reduced by 30% had a total of more than 6,000 fewer infections for an annual cost saving of up to $68 million. So a burnout, which is reduced, results in less mistakes, and then therefore less infections and cost saving over time. And the most profound cost saving is human life, because as we know, now nurses are the highest population within the medical profession, exceeding now physicians who are prone to completing suicide. Vicarious traumatization is another concept here. It's the process through which a therapist's inner experience is negatively transformed through empathic engagement with the client's trauma material. I would add here, this concept is from McCann and Perlman, it's an empathic engagement without the boundary of unmirroring and without seeing the end of the story that has a resiliency in it. staying on the dark side instead of seeing the light. That's often synonymous with secondary traumatic stress, STS, or compassion fatigue. If you want to think of it as a formula, so burnout along with secondary stress then results in a cumulative effect of compassion fatigue. So that's possibly a way you can put these concepts together in relation to each other. And the one thing that I have to remind us all is it's inevitable. It's inevitable. Compassion fatigue has to be felt. One cannot be deeply responsive to the world without being saddened very often. A quote by Eric Fromm. Just because you're feeling compassion fatigue, you don't have to pathologize it. It's the first sign of I need to slow down and pay attention, right? And I said a cumulative effect. It doesn't have to get to an extreme one, but just enough where you say something needs to change. I need to take some time. I need a vacation, even a short one. I need to rely on my team more so than I am. I need to delegate a little more. I need to talk to colleagues or supervisors about my compassion fatigue and about my secondary stress in critical incidents right as they happen. I need to find those alternative activities that bring the light, like the playground in my case. So, slowing down and noticing it is a way to overcome it. If you jump to, oh no, this is happening and now I'm pathological, then you are increasing the stress and it's iatrogenic for more stress. So, one last definition of compassion fatigue is a gradual lessening of compassion over time, resulting from a combination of burnout and secondary traumatic stress related to vicarious traumatization from repeated exposure to traumatic material of others and even your own in response to the system that has those demands. And you could start recognizing the signs other than the signs I first placed on the slide by thinking of stages you might go through. And each of the structures that might be affected from cognitive, emotional, behavioral, social, and physiological. And you can read that slide on your own. And I'll rush to our stages and talk about each one. And as we talk about each stage, I will talk about how to find the exit sign in this phase of the cycle. So in the zealot phase, you are committed, involved, and available. That sounds wonderful and ideal, except you are like that all the time, 24/7. Even when you go home, you carry it with you. You are solving problems and making a difference. You're willing to go the extra mile. You're excited about the work and you volunteer even without being asked. Doesn't it sound great? Except it's not sustainable over time, right? So you have to, when you notice yourself in the zealot phase, you can ask yourself, how long can I stay in it? When I started the trauma center at Harbor UCLA, I was in that phase for a very long time, maybe for the first 2 years. It kind of felt like it was needed. I was doing almost daily bedside outreaches and going to ICU, which is not my favorite place to be because I have a bit of a vasovagal response to medical issues. But I pushed through it and I went in there and I did all those bedside outreaches and was very fervently thinking about how the grant was written and how are we carrying it out and how are we really holding fidelity for what we promised. And then I was training and running seminars and volunteering more and more to present out in the community. And yes, I could have gotten into a compassion fatigue phase, but I started thinking at the end of those 2 years, because it's not sustainable, it's time to delegate. It's time to train others to do some of what I'm doing. It's time to really go home and close the door on the trauma center and just dedicate my time to my daughter. At that time, she was only 3, and really thinking about our togetherness and how I bring my whole self into that moment with her. My daughter and I created a concept called "We Need an M&M," and an M&M is not the candy at all. It's a managed meltdown, is what it is. So a managed meltdown is you've had too much, your day was too long, you're too cranky, and it's time to let it out. And so I would ask her, "Do you need an M&M?" And she would cuddle up and cry a little bit. And sometimes even at 3, she would ask me, "Mommy, do you need an M&M?" And I would do my own version, possibly with less crying or less whining, but still my version of M&M. And that was a way through the zealot phase, I have to tell you, is that I allowed myself to be my whole self at home and with friends and family. So my daughter doesn't have to feel parentified. And we got through it, right? We're now in 2025 and many years after, and it's rocking the trauma center. So there's ways out of this phase that allow you to be your full self, including your fragile parts of you. Because otherwise, you go into this phase, the irritability phase, where you begin to cut corners and avoid clients and use humor inappropriately, sometimes in a pejorative way, describing clients. And that's, to me, when I hear a team member, doesn't happen in the trauma center, but when I hear team members using that kind of humor, I know that they're not malicious or mean. I know that they're starting to go into that phase, the irritability phase, where oversights or mistakes or lapse of concentration are created, and then they start distancing themselves not just from coworkers, but from friends and sometimes their own family. So the signs of this phase is that your patience is short and you're not invested in the work so much anymore. And it's just starting. But once you recognize it, again, finding a nurturing moment, finding a way to feed yourself and a way to create some self-compassion in your life so that you can continue the work. Because otherwise, the next stage is withdrawing, loss of enthusiasms, and clients become more irritating to you. You're complaining, you're tired, and you try to avoid your negative emotions. Not enough M&Ms. So in that withdrawal phase, you are disconnected, and that phase can very quickly go into the next phase of the zombie phase, where hopelessness is now rage. You feel and look incompetent, not just to yourself, but even to others, because you have been in the withdrawal phase before this for a while. You're more indifferent, and your patience is now very, very thin. And so the zombie phase, unfortunately, will go to either an overwhelmed phase where you leave the profession at worst, or now this is the choice that you notice that the way you're being has been impacted by the environment and now is impacting your work, your life, and you take actions to build resiliency, and you really turn towards resiliency as your answer and as your inoculation from any more feeling overwhelmed and leaving as the alternative. So it's possible to find the exit sign at any one of those phases and think about, what do I need next to not reach this final phase? And how do I lean on others? How do I build trust if that's not there? How do I become vulnerable? Because it's hard to admit I am reaching that phase and I need some help right now. And if you have a good team that allows for it, and even if you don't, sometimes it's because the culture has not been established And you can be the first one that establishes it just by modeling it. That's often a good example of how to create it in your workplace. Because again, the alternative is complete dehydration, right? By the time you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So before you get there, ask for what you need and then give others what you think that they need as well. And you can create that culture of compassion within your workplace. This phrase, first presented by Nietzsche, what doesn't kill you make you stronger, is not actually true. It makes intuitive sense, but the reality only integrated, understood, and worked through trauma, right, that hasn't killed you, makes you stronger. Otherwise, trauma just makes you weaker. Um, Trauma leads to more trauma and more sensitivity to trauma and more activation around trauma and a cortisol overload that then creates no secretion whatsoever. So you're in a constant freeze zone at the end. So that's not stronger. What is stronger is being able to talk about your traumas, whether it's secondary traumas or things that are activated through countertransference with another person's trauma and get support through it. Again, either therapy, your team, as colleagues providing support, when you go home, finding moments in your family to just let yourself be yourself. Those are ways to be stronger. So here comes the practice of positive psychology. And the idea of positive psychology is what enables individuals and communities to thrive, basically. So, this idea of thriving and concepts related to it, like happiness and flow and neuroplasticity and positive emotions, are all stemming from the scientific study of what helps communities and people thrive. And one concept is more recent research in terms of this era, the neuroscience that indicates that we continuously grow. Our brain is informed. It used to be believed that at either 5 or 15 and then 26 was the key age that our brain is fully developed. But what we did not acknowledge is the brain has a continuous ability to rewire itself. And that process of neuroplasticity continues throughout the lifetime, even in old age. And the neuroplasticity is the process by which neural pathways are formed pretty much every day with every new experience in a way that teaches us to respond to our environment in a more adaptive way. And it's not just happiness we're after, it's also thriving and adapting and tending and befriending and relying on self-compassion. All those things can be part of a new way of understanding our environment and the stressors through this process. And one concept in positive psychology is the concept of resilience, the ability to cope with life's challenges and adapt to adversity. It can change over the course of your life. Resiliency isn't so much like grit. You might have heard that concept before, where you were kind of born with grit, and gritful individuals are. You can predict how grateful they are at the very beginning. Resilience actually changes, and the more exposure to resilience you have, the more you can build it. So it can increase indefinitely throughout your lifetime. And this concept from the Trauma Institute, where I was trained as a community resiliency model teacher, is the resilience zone. That zone can be widened. The idea here is that we all function within a zone that has highs and lows. Sometimes we're bumped out of those two blue lines and we're now in either below depression and withdrawal, like maybe the zombie phase, or we're way above and we're overwhelmed. But the key thing here is that that zone widens with your experience of accomplishment and your ways of teaching yourself to go into self compassion and learn new things from new experiences. And so that widening can be indefinite, and you can stay in the okay zone by widening what experiences you exposed to yourself to and you were exposed to, and then learned how to thrive through them. The resiliency is bouncing back, establishing a sense of community, having control over your own workflow, fostering good relationships, having positive responses to change. All of those things are principles within resiliency. And how do you create it? Right? And so here are 7 principles of resilience. Cultivate a belief in your ability to cope. And that belief stems from prior experiences where you coped, but also from this concept called opposite action, right? Like if we are afraid, then we might want to recoil. If we check the facts and we realize there aren't really reasons to be afraid, we can acknowledge that we feel it, but that we act opposite to fear, right? So cultivating a belief in your ability to cope requires opposite action, going opposite to what your feelings tell you to do. Stay connected with sources of support, your community, your team, your family when you need to. Talk about it, what you're going through. Be vulnerable. Allow yourself to show your emotions. Stay mindful of your emotions and stay with them. Be helpful to others. This is where 10 befriend fits in. Activate positive emotions while acknowledging negative emotions. That's always important. It's not just the positive, but the negative that are important. There's a book called The Upside of the Dark Side, and it's all about how negative emotions motivate and actually foster more resilience in people. And so acknowledging the negative means that you really pay attention to how they're coming up and what are they there to teach you, like our quote in the very beginning. Cultivate an attitude of survivorship or thriving, an attitude of, I will overcome this even in a small way. And what is the smallest step I could take to feel like I'm back in control or that makes me even slightly happy? Seek meaning and then value aligned actions, right? The more your life aligns with your principles in terms of why you're working, the more invested you are. So seek meaning and value aligned action. And I spoke of happiness a few times. It's a concept in positive psychology. And what we know from positive psychology is that we can increase our happiness with interventions, even though there is such a thing as happiness set point that is established by life circumstances and genetics. So that's about 60%. But that leaves 40%, the glass is half full. 40% is under our control. There are things that we can implement that create that happiness. And the study of the happy nuns taught us that. So these are Catholic nuns and autobiographical accounts of 180 of them in their youth between 18 to 32 were coded in terms of emotional content, either positive, negative, or neutral. And those positive nuns lived longer, still alive at 85. Only 34 of the least positive nuns were alive at 85. 54% of most positive were still going at 94. And 11% of least positive were alive at 94. So happiness increases longevity. It doesn't only increase longevity in terms of lifespan, but it also increases health span, as we'll see in a moment when we look at gratitude. But this theory of well-being comes from Martin Seligman. Many people attribute him to be the father of positive psychology. And it's the same Seligman that did the studies on the dogs. I think he redeemed himself, though, with this model. And this model basically emphasizes these five principles: cultivating positive emotions, engagement in things that are meaningful to you and engaging fully in them, building positive relationships, meaning making, even from adversity, and then accomplishment. And accomplishment isn't just, I made CEO of a company kind of accomplishment, but small ones along the way. On the road to bigger things. And even if the outcome is not successful, this sort of goes back to Bandura's self efficacy model. It's the effort you put forth. That could be the accomplishment, not that you succeeded, but that you gave it your best, right? These, according to Laborsky, the types of emotional states that are identified as expanding mindset repertoire. Those particular emotions increase happiness. And you could study this list at your own time. This could be a resiliency pause. Pause the video if you want and read through and think about which of those emotional states do I experience more often, and which ones are missing or lacking in some way, and what can I do to begin increasing them on a routine basis, on a daily basis. Okay. So this relates to that resiliency pause we just did. Is what area in your life, in your care wheel, is out of balance, and how can you realign? Come up with 3 activities. And the care wheel is the balance of work, life, recreation, social, and how do you align? All right. Finally, the practice of gratitude. I can't say enough about that. I have my own practice through my journal, and I start every morning with my daughter with our gratitude beads, and we do all of them as we're getting ready to go to school. And we do really simple things, like for the sky and the sun and the birds is often what she says. And I say for my mobility and for my brain still functioning at my age and so on. But we do it collectively. And what it shows is the studies by Emmons and McCullough suggest that gratitude strengthens the immune system, lowers blood pressure, reduces symptoms of illness, makes us less bothered by aches and pains, encourages us to exercise more and take better care of ourselves, even if there is pain. The striving to doing even minimal work is part of being grateful that you can even move at all. I had a friend who was paralyzed after a car accident, and I remember he would still call me and say, "Let's go out dancing." And we would go on a dance floor, and he mostly just moved his neck. He was paraplegic, his neck and arms, but he had the best time doing that. And I was reminded of that recently with had a frozen shoulder condition. And I remember thinking to myself, oh no, now I can't dance. And then he came to mind, and I did a dance with one arm, and feeling that I could still move my legs and my torso was very, very pleasing to me. And I almost forgot about my pain. All right. So here's another resiliency pause at this moment. You have exactly a minute to write down all the things that you're grateful for, just the 1 minute. And let's see how many you can come up with. All right, a little bit more about the gratitude group who was assigned doing a gratitude practice. This group felt better about their lives as a whole, were more optimistic and happier, and have fewer health complaints, and also experienced fewer symptoms of physical illness. And that effect lasted even after 6 months after the study ended. Maybe they kept up the gratitude journal, or maybe it became a lifestyle, hopefully. So here are the list of physical things that are improved through gratitude practice. When I say practice, I mean a daily writing. You could do the three things you're grateful for, and you could do timelines, past, present, future. Many ways. There's no wrong way to practice gratitude. I love my beads because it's a tangible way to put a bead with a gratitude, and my daughter loves it too. So it's a common practice for us. A few other studies that are really more compelling and more recent. In 2016, patients with stage B heart failure were studied, and those who kept a gratitude journal showed fewer biological signs that their heart disease was getting worse and showed healthier resting heart rate. This is all based on the gratitude. They were matched for everything else. And one more, healthcare providers who wrote down things for which they're grateful had a reduction in perceived stress, 28% reduction, and depression. So that's pretty compelling too. So the compassion satisfaction as the new term, I love that. I don't think I heard it before. A few years back when I was doing more studies on compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction was starting to pop up. It's a shift that occurred on the positive experiences that occur sometimes in spite of trauma, right? So the compassion satisfaction is about the pleasure experience we get from maybe seeing the growth and the healing, others as well as our own. And so thinking about what are ways we can increase it. Even in the early stages when we see the trauma unfolding and they're starting to create a narrative about their trauma, how do we kind of see the roadmap that would lead us to more compassion satisfaction in the long term? And with that term comes also vicarious resilience. Seeing that woman who stood up to the judge and said, you are being ridiculous, this is not a profession, was my moment of vicarious resilience. I saw in her the power and the fortitude to stand up for herself and claim a different life. Right. And this is the concept of mature gratitude, which is different than the other kind of gratitude. It's a dynamic and dialectical interplay between positive and negative life experiences in each context, right? So take the good with the bad or the negative and look at both and think about how have I grown through these experiences that were more negative, and how can I continue to grow from what those things have taught me. All right, so you can read Wang, particularly, is the researcher that looks at mature gratitude and presents concepts from that. Okay, strategies to build compassion resilience. The next few slides are a lot about what can we do, and hopefully that will be some of your takeaways. So, one, have realistic expectations of yourself and others. What is enough? What can I hope for? And then exposure to recovery, right? Like claim those moments that you need for yourself to recover. Set good boundaries, compassionate boundary settings, both for yourself and also sometimes for your team, especially if you're a supervisor or a director, that you notice what's happening for others and they've done shifts after shifts and are volunteering for everything. They're in the zealot phase in the trajectory, but you're recognizing it early, and you're maybe are part of the compassionate boundary settings for others too. Creating a culture of connection with colleagues, others in the community, and the client's natural supports, and self-care strategies. Right, lots of M&Ms, lots of mindfulness practices, looking at physical and emotional strength, and how are you staying true to your heart, and how are you aligned with what's important, with your values. And then look to your team. This is a time where staff culture can come into question, And what are your staff culture agreements? What are your limitations, both as an individual within that team and as a team? What organizations or colleagues can offer that you cannot, and how do you let yourself rely on them? What is the belief in the capacity of others in your team? How much do you trust them? And how do you start building that through team activities? In the trauma center, we have yearly gatherings to talk about those aspects, and sometimes more than yearly. We also do surveys on a regular basis to tap what is the staff morale. And then what do you need to do to increase your knowledge and belief in the capacity of others? Do you even know what others on your team are doing? What is their day like? What is a community health worker doing? How many calls have they done just today to find housing or to establish victim compensation or work with VOC to get an application in? That so many things can be happening around you you're oblivious to unless you take time and intentionally discover them. And within the team, when it's secondary stress, what is the form for processing intense and sometimes extreme behaviors? Do you have someone to turn to? Do you have a group on a weekly basis? We did for a while where you can come in with critical incidents that really affected you and traumatic experiences of your own and unload them for a while and get some compassionate breaks from both you listening to yourself and others empathizing. Does your organization have a structure for confidential and effective identification management of compassion fatigue? Can you write and talk about that, maybe first anonymously and then later, if you need to, request help specifically? Importantly, not crisis driven, right? If you wait for the crisis, again, this is a dehydration, instead of just being thirsty, it's really hard to recoup. And so, not in a crisis situation, you don't have to wait for a critical incident. This can be weekly. And finally, do you have your own regular self compassion practice, and who encourages your self compassion? Has to be you to start, but do you live within a family and then a subculture and then a culture and a climate at work that encourages self-compassion? That's really important. If you want to learn more about self-compassion, the work of Christine Neff is wonderful. Lots of videos online to practice with her or to read about. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about post-traumatic growth. This will be the last few slides. And what we know from the literature, post-traumatic growth is expressed through greater appreciation for life, closer relationships, new possibilities and opportunities, personal growth in personal strength and spiritual development. Lots of the things we already talked about, as you noticed, when we talked about the PERMA model and thinking about resiliency as well. And so these are the ways to cultivate that contribute to post-traumatic growth. And so this is antidotes to compassion fatigue. The first is a mindfulness practice. So a regular mindfulness practice of it's not just the breath work, pranayama, or going to yoga or doing any of those, but a daily that is part of your everyday activities, like smelling the flowers, literally and figuratively. Do you go outside and notice the color of the trees and the sky? Do you let yourself feel the sun or notice the breeze? Those are all simple and routine mindfulness practice that can help your day. How are you value aligned in your work and in your personal life? Where do they merge? Where they create a balanced story of who you are and who you aspire to be? How do you reframe compassion fatigue from thinking of it as pathology to meaning making and to resilience building? How do you notice it and learn from it? How do you come across people who are suffering and really look at and understand their core essence? When I was working in the jail, I would have a practice of coming to a new patient and those terms inmate, and thinking about where did they come from? What was their childhood like? Who is this person that's maybe cuffed in front of me and the arrest record shows murder? What do I not know? What's not there? And maybe I could try to picture them as infants first and notice where my empathy is at that moment. So touching their core essence, pausing to connect, really look at their eyes, look at their expression, not just see the monsters sometimes that are built through what you read, but really connect with who they are as human. Have a more holistic view of life and health, not having compartments, right? This trauma belongs there at work and now it's shut off, but it's part of my life now. It's in my memory, and I'm going to digest it, and I'm going to integrate it, and then I'm going to release it and allow myself to still focus on what's beautiful. It's like fitting in. My favorite quote by Krishnamurti is it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Sometimes our quest to fit in is a quest to fit in into sickness, unfortunately. So letting go of fitting in, especially if you're part of a larger system, possibly a community mental health system or a hospital, where overall the system is sick in several ways, and you fitting in just means you're buying that. Living an exposure lifestyle, right? Like things that are hard for you to do and that you are shying away from doing, and then you're going into your fight, flight, freeze response, and that becomes your style, right? If you think about it, if you're used to fighting or fleeing, you are maybe your attachment style is more anxious or avoidant versus living life in a way that opens up more exposure to things that are scary, and in that way creating a more secure attachment to others. So an exposure lifestyle is a lot of opposite action. I will share one of mine in a moment in the next few slides. And then changing traumatic stories to resilience stories. All right, so here's my favorite quote in the slide by Jiddu Krishnamurti. And here's my opposite action. I used to be deathly afraid of sharks, so I started diving. Now, this is not a shark, it's just a turtle. This is in Oahu, Hawaii, where they're abundant. So not so scary and not sharks. And this is an octopus. A little more scary because at that time I didn't know they have a beak that can come out and pretty much crush your fingers. But he's happy, you could tell from his colors. And then finally, here are the sharks. And here I am, right? I was literally phobic of sharks, and it would interfere with my going to the beach and relaxing in the water, going into the water. Finally in Belize, and I finally decided to dive. And these are bull sharks, so they're not benign. These are not nurse sharks. And I can't say it was scary because by that time I was ready and I was thinking about this is an exposure and I need it. And I've not been afraid since. And I think about where in my life are more exposures that I need, and I try to embrace them on a daily basis. All right, so the final words for post-traumatic growth, cultivate meaningful life activities, have a growth lifeline where exposures are embedded, have enough of a community immersion for your work to feel meaningful and supported, face new endeavors which are challenging within the resiliency zone, and a little bit stretch every time to expand it. Discover new strengths and assets, and cultivate mature gratitude that allows you some negative emotions in order to celebrate the positive ones as well. I did promise you a resiliency story. So this is how we do it in CREM when you get trained. We have to share our own. We start at the end. How did we get through it? What do we remember? When do we remember when we felt safer? What were our resiliency elements? What strengths or qualities did you bring to get through it? And how did you grow? And what meaning did you make of your story? So you have all the time to just pause the slide and look at this and then think of your own story. And I will share mine really fast. So in 2020, my mother died from COVID, and I was able to go in her room and be with her in her final moments. So that's the beginning and the end right there, start at the end. The end was that I was able to be with her. How did I get through it? I did my opposite action. At that time, I had to fly to where she was in the hospital where she was hospitalized, and I came fully geared up. I got my gear from the fire department, and I came into the hospital on day one. I think it was a Tuesday, and I said, I really need to see my mother. I know that it's a COVID room and you have regulations, but she always told me she doesn't want to die alone, and that's why I'm here. And they said, please go home. And I did. And I came back Wednesday, and I came back Thursday, and I came back Friday, and I came back Saturday. And finally, all the days in my full gear from the fire department saying, I will take responsibility. Please let me in. So this is the strength or quality I didn't even know I had, because I'm often a pretty soft-spoken person and not very assertive in that way. Assertive in other ways when I need to advocate for something I really believe in, but relatively soft spoken. And I really put all my oomph in there, saying, I will not leave until I see my mother, because she told me without us holding her hand through her passing, she doesn't know that she can do it. So on Saturday, I met with all the physicians with social distancing, and I said, this is so crucial for our family. And I'm the only representative. It's not that the whole family needs to be here. It's just me. And they finally let me in. And they kind of forgot I was there. So 6 hours later, I was still with her, sharing stories and singing to her and crying a good deal. And but really having a moment of meaning with her, and knowing that she felt me, and that she felt my hand, and she felt my presence, and I was able to let it go. And the meaning at the end was that despite this traumatic parting, because it was sudden and unexpected, that I was able to be there for her the way she wanted and the way I wanted our final moments. And that's my resiliency story. And I wrote the poem after that experience. The poem reads one way when you read it from the top down. It sounds dark and terrible. But there's another way to read the poem, and it's from the bottom up. So it starts with love conquers all. We can hold on to the belief that love binds all sentient beings and that there is a universal connection. It is a fallacy that every person is for himself. We all know that we feel and care deeply for one another. It is not true that people are fake and self-serving. We all know that people are naturally kind. You will never be able to convince me that love is not the reason and the answer for everything. So start with the end. And think about your own one-arm dance through the world, and think about how you grow through trauma and what you take from it. That's part of you, part of your strengths that make you resilient. Thank you. I will take questions at this time if there are any.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saberi, for sharing your powerful personal resilience story with us, and for such an insightful, practical presentation. What a morning of mindfulness. I so enjoyed hearing everything you had to share with us. It was incredibly powerful, full of tools, full of insights, and most importantly, full of lived wisdom. So thank you so much for that.
Lisa. Appreciate that.
So one of the reasons we created this series this month was really to offer a resource to those who are navigating uncertainties during times of challenge. And many of us are finding ourselves in increasingly uncertain times. You spoke about the resiliency window, ways to widen our window, and our choice in the moment. And that 40%, right? So, in the area of neuroplasticity and positive psychology, you introduced the concept of brain rewiring. What are one or two just accessible practices clinicians can use to begin that rewiring process?
Great question, Lisa. Thank you. And it sounds like brain surgery in some way. I need to rewire somehow. But the nice thing is your behavior rewires your brain. You don't have to get in there with scalpels and excise the not so great things and put in the good. It's your routine behaviors create new neural pathways. So this exposure lifestyle I spoke of, that's a forming of new neural pathways that create new habits that then are essentially now new pathways, right? So, not avoiding, approaching through this opposite action idea. That's one, and having a regular practice of examining what in your life you are not celebrating, you're not upholding, and that you're not cultivating, and thinking about how to get closer to it, especially if those things are aligned with your values. You're not going to just take up rock climbing because it seems like an exposure that's needed. If you being out in nature and enjoying the challenge of rock climbing, that's not me. But absolutely. So just find those value aligned activities, and those will create the new neural pathways in your life. That's the short answer.
So, another question we have for you, can you share a bit more about mature gratitude? How does it differ from traditional gratitude practices and why it's relevant to providers working in high stress environments?
Yes, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about mature gratitude, including some of the negative. So gratitude initially was just about the silver lining. What am I grateful for? And very rarely it would be concepts such as I'm grateful that I had such a challenging time at work and I had 5 new clients that were really difficult to engage for me, and that I felt like there was so much taxing because of their case management needs. Like those things weren't on our list before. I'm grateful for that. But with mature gratitude, you're actually encouraged to add those things that are challenging, that maybe overwhelmed you, in order to think about this resiliency building, right? Like, what are your strengths when you face them? What did you learn about yourself that was new? How did you cope with it? What was your takeaway, right? So mature gratitude actually shows you that those challenging things were your ways to grow. And now you could be grateful that they appeared in the first place as a challenge.
Great, thank you. On resilience and post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is a powerful concept. So for clinicians supporting others through trauma, can you expand on how they can begin fostering that growth in themselves, especially in the midst of ongoing stressors or uncertainties?
Beautiful question. And that's often, I think this will be my new area of research, is how do we actually cultivate post-traumatic growth rather than wait for it to happen. I usually find the early signs of post-traumatic growth when I'm working with clients. Do I see their spark? Maybe they talk about trauma that relates to DV, domestic violence, or human trafficking. And then when they talk about teaching others, I see that spark. I have a human trafficking survivor that became a speaker. Before then, she was a singer, but she was choked and her vocal cords were damaged, so she couldn't sing anymore. But the spark came when she started talking as a speaker on human trafficking. So you can notice the spark occur, and then you bring it up later when they're ready. And the same thing can happen to you. Us as providers is to think about where do I see the roadway to creating more growth. So look for those early signs and cultivate them, like plant them. So now they're in the ground waiting to bloom one day. And so thinking of those things that will serve you later, early on, and then intentionally and mindfully come back to what were the things that you survived and how do they speak to your assets and your strengths. And you have to do it almost on a daily basis. What did I encounter today? What was hard about it? And how did it make me stronger? How did it help me grow? What did it teach me about myself? That's part of post traumatic growth. And I don't want it to sound like it's devoid of pain because part of it is also self compassion, right? This was hard for me. And maybe cry, have a M&M, have a meltdown, managed meltdown about it. I believe in crying, by the way, a lot. I think crying is such a beautiful healing thing. And it doesn't have to be big boohoo and a lot of tears and snot. It can be a lamenting of sorts that you can do internally about this was painful and I want to acknowledge it. And then I feel so relieved after. So my child is adopted and was opiate exposed in birth. Before birth, and then it's evident at birth. And I remember thinking that most of the professionals around me were telling me, you got to manage those emotional dysregulation and you need to kind of teach her very early on how to become more regulated, more balanced. And I was saying, no, maybe this is part of what she needs. So we're going to cultivate staying in the moment when painful things come up and dysregulated things come up. And we're purposely going to hold them and transition slowly. And that worked for us. I kind of suggest that for ourselves too.
I love the concept of the M&M, managed meltdown. I'm going to be using that at home. So thank you. I have little ones as well. So last question, Dr. Saberi, we have for you. For those clinicians, for those supervisors, for teams, what are some strategies to bring these resilience building and burnout prevention practices into the workplace, into daily practice? You used a term, unmirroring from the trauma of the day, so perhaps you could tie that in as well.
Yes, great. Good question. I could spend another hour just on that, but I won't for your sake and our listeners. So I'd say, I talked about building a culture that checks in and says, how did your day go? And what important, meaningful thing happened? What do you need to talk about or unload? What seems important to you to be able to surrender here in the workplace in order to go home and feel more peaceful and quiet. So we used to have a checkout. We don't do it as often. I want to restore that, but we used to have a checkout other than the morning check-in, and it was all about that. What was the day like that left you with an impression that you need to process. And then allowing some unmirroring as a team. And the concept of unmirroring is, of course, our mirror neurons fire when something happens and we are empathically connected with another person that way. So when we hear a trauma story, our mirror neurons are firing in order to really get empathy, to feel empathy and connect with that person. And then we need to unmirror. We need to kind of close them down. My practice from somatic experiencing, I've done some sessions with Peter Levine, is a bit of shaking the body is ways to unmirror, some polyvagal stimulation like humming, to know this is their story. I'm only a part of it to the degree that they have let me in and I could feel with them. And now it's their story to continue carrying in order to unload fully, right? So the unmirroring is letting theirs be theirs and knowing where we begin. So there's somatic ways to do it, there's emotional, and then there's spiritual way to do it. Like I usually say a prayer when I hear a really intense traumatic story, or for all my clients for that matter. I just say a prayer at the end when we do our work, or at the end of the day, saying more things that are not based in any religion, but more about I hope your higher good shines through and shows you the way through this pain to the light. Something simple like that. Those are ways to cultivate post traumatic growth.
Well, we'll have to have you back to continue this discussion. And before we close today, just thank you again, Dr. Saberi, for sharing your wisdom with us. We so appreciate it and so appreciate you and your time. I'd like to highlight a valuable resource for those seeking trauma-informed support in Los Angeles. The Safe Harbor Trauma Recovery Center at Harbor UCLA Medical Center offers comprehensive services to individuals who have experienced trauma, including survivors of violence, abuse, or traumatic loss. Their approach combines evidence-based mental health care, case management, and crisis intervention, delivered with cultural sensitivity and compassion. The center works to reduce the long-term effects of trauma by supporting healing, recovery, and resilience. So for more information or to reach Dr. Saberi with any further questions or referral, you can visit dhs.laccounty.gov/Harbor-UCLA-medical-center. And as just our last close, I'd like to take a moment to highlight the breadth of mental health support available through the Help Group. We offer a wide range of comprehensive programs designed to support the emotional and psychological well-being of children, adolescents, young adults, and families. From school-based and intensive interventions to individual therapy and family counseling, our multidisciplinary teams provide evidence-based, compassionate care tailored to each person's unique needs. Services are available across Los Angeles with specialized support from trauma recovery to neurodivergence and more. To learn more or to make a referral, please visit thehelpgroup.org. And I'd also like to share one last resource. We're especially proud of our Lumina counseling and coaching services. Lumina is a trusted community-based program offering both in-person and virtual support for children, teens, young adults, and families navigating challenges like anxiety, depression, school stress, and life transitions. Our licensed therapists and coaches are here to help build resilience, strengthen relationships, and create a safe space for growth. So to learn more, visit luminacounselingla.com. Thank you again for being part of today's conversation and for all you do to support mental health in our communities.